Hello, everyone, and welcome to Working Together on the Transition to School. Before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, alongside families and early ed, would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining this webinar today. My name's Bree, and I'm joining today from the lands of the Murrumbidgee people of the Yuin Nation. So, starting school is a big milestone for any child and family. But when your child has a disability, a developmental delay, autism, or other support needs, there can be a lot more to think about. There may be questions about what school needs to know, who should be involved, what supports might help, and how to make the transition feel as calm and positive for your child. Tonight, we're joined by Kim from Early Ed. Thank you so much, Kim. We've had Kim along
Thank
several
you.
times for webinars now, and we just keep having her back because she's so wonderful. But Kim's here to talk about how your child's therapy or early intervention team can support the transition to school. She's going to help us explore how families, schools, therapists, and early intervention providers can work together, share helpful information, and plan ahead in practical ways. Kim comes with a lot of experience. She's an education consultant at Early Ed with more than 30 years' experience supporting children with disability and their families across early intervention, childcare, preschool, primary, and high school settings. She also holds a Master's of Special Education and is a positive behaviour support practitioner. And Kim has worked in support classes as well as a specialist educator within mainstream school. And I guess all your work, as we've come to know, is grounded in collaboration and in supporting families to feel heard and confident as they navigate education systems. So as I mentioned earlier, there may be time for questions. We're going to do our best. So use the Q&A box. And as always, this is general information only. Kim may not be able to answer questions about individual children, schools, or specific situations, but we hope tonight gives you practical ideas, some helpful language maybe, and a clearer sense of who can support you as your child prepares for school. So I'm going to stop talking now because no one's here to listen to me. They're here to see Kim again, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Kim. Thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you, Bree. Thank you for having me. Yes, there is quite a bit to cover tonight, but as Bree mentioned, the resources will be shared, the slides will be shared. We will probably go through it at a fairly rapid pace, and some of it will be new language. But yeah, if you do have any questions, outcomes that we will be covering tonight. Key roles that schools, families, and early intervention providers can play: information sharing, curating opportunities to collaborate, adapting strategies from home or therapy for the classroom, ways that families and therapy teams can support your child to feel familiar, comfortable, and ready for school, and ways that you can build positive relationships within the school community. This webinar covers the following links to the national and standards and framework. We have got a few opportunities for your feedback throughout this webinar. This is the first one. They're just pretty brief. Is how confident do I feel working together with my child's team to support their transition to school? So we have very confident, confident, a little confident, not confident, and you're not sure.
Quite mixed. We don't have too many that are overly confident. I think most people are sitting in a little bit confident, and a few that are a little bit unknown. Yes, I
Thank
think
you.
I think 47% of us are sitting in at that mid-range,
Mhm.
and it's pretty even either side.
Oh, it comes up. Oh, that's what you just said. Thank you, Bree. Okay, so part of best practice. Sorry, my slide isn't changing as quick. Part of best practice in early intervention is what we call the team around your child approach. You may or you may not be familiar with that already. And the team around your child has your child at its centre. So it's child-centred approach, a strengths-based approach. Around the child is obviously your child's family, and family is, it can be mum, it can be dad, it can be grandparents, it can be aunties, it can be uncles, it can be kinship carers. The definition of family is fluid, and it's whoever is closest to the child and who can support your child. And that's part of what you choose, who is part of that family. Then around that in the blue, you can see we have community, and community is early childhood centre, so childcare, preschool, playgroup. You might have, toy libraries that you go to. So it's services that you access in the community. And part of that, it will obviously also be school when your child starts school. And then around that, we have your child's early intervention team, and that will include people such as behaviour specialists, family support workers, occupational therapists, psychologists, special educators, and speech pathologists. So there's some additional information there if you'd like to follow up on that model. I think it is useful information to have. Because it is a different approach. So instead of each person working individually to work on their goals, it's very much about everyone working as a team and collaborating. Sometimes what can happen is in the team around the child approach, because not everyone is obviously existing in the same space, part of what needs to happen is communication with each other. And I know in some of the teams that I work with, if they're people within our organisation, early ed, then obviously I can see notes and we can collaborate that way. If they're people who are not working within our organisation, then often what I try to do, with consent, of course, all of this is with parental consent, is we can share summary notes if that's considered okay. And that really gives a good opportunity for other therapists to read about the strategies that are being used and just make sure we're all on the same page. We're still working on different goals maybe, but we're all on the same page. And part of what happens is also often this model has a key worker. And the key worker is the person who will then collaborate most with your family. That key worker can be really important in the transition to school because you may have several therapists that are working individually with your child, but there may be one area of need in particular or one therapist that you've just built a bit more of a rapport with. And that can be a really good person to be your key worker. So that can be your support person if you'd like someone to go with you to meetings. It can also be your person who can maybe help liaise with the school, liaise with the childcare centre. Obviously, if it's NDIS funding, be aware that that's all done as an hourly billable hour, like make sure that you've clarified all of that up front. But that can be a really helpful resource. And you can choose that key worker if that works for you. So the key roles for your team. There are three main, just a little bit of information which you may or may not know, but there are three main school systems in New South Wales. So we're coming from New South Wales. I know sometimes people watch it from further away, but the Department of Education and Training, or DET for short, Catholic schools, Australian independent schools. And I think one of the things to be aware of is that, say, for example, the DET, which is a very big system that has a lot of schools within it, as does the Catholic diocese, different dioceses. Each school and each system will have different processes. So one of the things to be aware of is just to become familiar with that. And that can be by asking questions, liaising with the school, seeing what the processes are. Often they will let you know. So, school will let you know what needs to happen and what the next steps are. Start talking to your early intervention team 12 to 18 months before your child is due to start school. Now, please don't walk away from tonight and think, oh my goodness, I've only got 6 to 8 months. That's fine, but it is good to start early because then you have, information. And sometimes the information can be a little bit overwhelming. So sometimes if you hear it earlier and then you revisit it the year later, you're at a different point and you can absorb that information in a different way. One of the things that we often sort of talk about is researching schools. So, your child may be attending the local area, the public school in the local area, but it's still really a good idea just to research the school, as in just to, be curious about how the school works, attend things like open days, talk to people in your local community, early childhood educators, your therapy team. I'm a little bit old school. I'm not necessarily on Facebook, but I know there are lots of parents who get some really valuable information from the communities that are on Facebook, and obviously anyone that you talk to. Everyone will have a different lens that they're looking at things through. So, have a talk to people and listen and absorb information and then make your own decisions. Talk to your therapy team about school readiness and goals to focus on. Plan ahead. So children can start kindergarten at the beginning of their school year if they turn 5 on or before the 31st of July that year. And by law, all children must be in compulsory schooling by their 6th birthday. Now, I just wanted to do a little tiny bit here on school readiness because it's a term that's really used a lot, as if it's an end goal. And I think the thing just to kind of remember is it's not an end goal. School readiness is very individual and it's different for each child. Your child does not need to be at a certain stage or pass a test or have a particular skill set of checklist of things that they need to be able to do in order to be considered school ready. So when they turn 5 or in the year that they turn 6, a good school will support your child and meet them where they're at. So I think that's an important thing to remember because sometimes what can happen, especially in the build up to around this time of the year, oh, they're not ready, they can't do this, they can't. And so instead of it being a strengths-based approach, it becomes almost like a deficit model where we're looking at all the things that haven't been achieved yet. That isn't how it should work. It really should be building on skills that your child already has and them doing things to the best of their ability at the time where they currently are, not thinking about meeting a certain test. And then that kind of also links me into the Best Start Kindergarten assessment. So that is an assessment that is done for all children in the first 5 weeks of kindergarten. And again, we have got a little video, but I don't know if we have time to show that one. So we might just put that in with the links and the resources. But there's a little video that just talks about what that involves. Your child will come and they will do a one-to-one assessment with their child, their kindergarten teacher at the beginning of the year that they're starting. And it's fairly informal. The child will just think that they're playing some games, they're talking about some stories, things like that. And it's not a test that has to be passed in order for your child to be accepted to kindergarten. It just gives the teacher a bit of a sense of where different children are at, and then think about, okay, well, we need to do some groupings along this way, and then maybe we work on these skills and things like that, just to get for them to know your child a little bit better. And just remember to enroll and start the collaboration process early. And remember that each interaction is an opportunity for you to get a feel for the school. So it's a two-way street, and like any relationship that you're building, get a feel for the school, whether that fits with your family's sense of belonging and community and things like that, and also for you to build positive relationships. So it's getting to know each other. There is also a little link around this transition, but I'm just wondering whether maybe we don't do that one either, Brie. I'm just a bit concerned about time. What do
You
you
can
think?
share all the links after.
Yeah, we'll share the links. So the reason that little video is quite interesting, and there are other little videos on that page, is it gives you information on what the process is within the Department of Education and Training schools. And I think sometimes those things are really helpful for you to know, because it's talks about what is best practice for the school. And so then that gives you a sense of what should be happening. And if you really feel that some of those things are not happening, then you can just gently or firmly question around, oh, I saw this on the website. So all the information that's being shared is also it's publicly accessible. None of these links are, training tools that are only available for teachers within the DET or anything like that. So this is just information that I think is sometimes good for parents to have. And again, as Brie mentioned earlier, it also just allows you to kind of familiarise yourself with some of the language, which, when you enter any new system, it's good to become familiar with the language, and just so that because often acronyms and things are used without them meaning to. And of course, always ask. Like I'm a big believer in, what does that mean? I'm not sure. Can you explain that? So information sharing helping to understand your child's strengths and support needs. So there are various ways that this can be done. One of them that is used is called the Transition to School Digital Statement. It's a bit long-winded, but it's a digital statement that is completed by your child's early childhood centre and then shared with your child's school. Now, one of the things I've just written down the bottom here is about signed consent forms. Sometimes what can be a little bit tricky is remembering that all of this information can be shared if you have given signed consent. So if there's no signed consent, there's no written, so that's in writing, not just verbally, pardon me, then that information can't be shared. So that's something that your early childhood centre should be able to help you with. Also, just something to keep in the back of your mind when or if you are at a school where therapists are able to visit your child at school, the school will need written consent from you to say that they can talk to a therapist, and your therapist will also need signed written consent from their end. So sometimes I know parents go, oh, I've already filled that in. Why am I like it gets a bit confusing? And also, I think just to be aware too, from a an agency and a self empowerment point of view, at any point you can withdraw that consent. So if you're kind of getting a sense that maybe things are being shared that you're not comfortable with, or there's sections of a report that you would rather wasn't shared with everybody. When I say everybody, obviously people that are working with your child. I don't mean everybody in the school because that's not okay. At any point, if you have concerns, you can withdraw your consent, or you can say, I have some questions around that. Can we just pause it? And then no further information should be shared. So that's just something I think to be aware of.
And can I
So
just
we've
ask
got
a
the.
question around the digital statement?
Mhm.
Is that something that parents can view before it's sent to the school from from the early childcare provider, or is it generally just sent without parental view?
I'm not sure about that, but I would think that if you like, I would be the sort of parent that I would like to see it before it was
Yeah,
sent.
that's what I'm
Yeah,
thinking. I'd like to
yeah,
see it
I
too.
would. Yeah. So I think, and this is again showing my age, when I was sort of personally or like professionally involved in it, it was actually done on paper. So then it was an easier document to share. The other thing I couldn't quite find out was if you, for example, don't have, like, say your child's not in childcare or in a preschool, whether it's a document that a parent can fill in. So that might be just, I couldn't find that information anywhere. But I imagine if something like the transition to school digital statement exists plus a school enrollment form exists, then to me that leads me to believe, well, they must be documents that hold different bits of pieces of information. So that might be something to ask. I mean, I would ask. I would say, hey, I've heard about the digital statement. I'd love to see that before it gets sent. Like, I think that's perfectly within, your rights to do that for sure.
Thank you.
Um, So the other information was around sharing written notes from therapy sessions. So that wouldn't be necessarily something that you'd be doing maybe before your child starts school, but I think it is a really valuable one for after your child starts school. I mean, best practice is for your therapist to be doing summary notes after each session, so that you are walking away with a written transcripts, not transcript. Anyway, you understand what I mean. But with a written, I just put myself in that position again. That
A
is
written
written.
summary. It's exactly how you explained it. A written summary of what's actually taken place in that session.
Yeah, so it's a written summary, exactly, Brie. So it's a written summary, and it just gives you a reminder of the strategies that you're also working on. And I think that's really valuable because sometimes there's lots of things that happen in those sessions, and you might think, oh, I can do this, I can do that. I have to, if it's not written down, then it's really hard for you to remember. So that I think is also really valuable. Say, for example, if you go to a speech therapy session, and you're happy for your speech therapist to share the summary notes with you and also say with the school. I mean, you might already be doing this also with childcare. This can also happen with childcare and preschool. Um, I think that is really valuable because they're often quite short. They're easy to read. Like I know as a teacher, when those things were sent to me when I was in the classroom, you are time poor. Like people are busy, but you quickly get that and you have a quick scan through it and you might think, oh, that's strategy. Oh, yeah, I'm kind of doing that already. I'll just make sure I include, that child in that strategy, or, it just allows your brain just to kind of mull those things over quickly without having to read lots and lots of information, but only if you are comfortable with that. There may be some information that, say, for example, you're sharing, that your OT might be writing about that you consider too personal and you don't want that shared with school. Psychologists might also be different, so just be aware of when it's okay and when it's not. So the summary page of the strategies, we'll go into that one a little bit more later, but basically, when you've got the information sharing, focus should be on strategies that are able to be used within the classroom. And as much as possible, then they could be strategies that the teacher can use for your child as well as for other children in the classroom, because there's going to be more chance of say the teacher using that particular strategy and that skill set from their toolbox of skills, if it's applicable to other children. And that's part of it as well, because then what's happening, I know we're here individually advocating for your individual children. That's the family's role. But part of what also from a professional point of view is to build the teacher's capacity. So the more that we can do that, then the better we start with that foundation, and the less it is having, I mean, we did a webinar on reasonable adjustments, the less those things become about individual reasonable adjustments, and the more they just become what they call like the tier one or the level one of foundational teaching skills. So they're just things that the teacher is naturally doing as part of their skill set. Yep. So that was it. We'll go into that one a little bit more.
And Kim did just mention the webinar that we previously did on reasonable adjustments. So we will include the link to that recording for anyone that hasn't seen it in the resource email afterwards as well.
Sorry, it's not flicking over that fast. Okay, so ways to create opportunities to collaborate and plan ahead. So this one is a little bit wordy, so I'll just try and go through it. And again, the links will be shared. So building positive relationships, part of your role, as I mentioned, is to advocate for your child. And every parent does that really well to the best of their ability. And just also remembering on, I suppose, around that is schools are very busy places. So I just mentioned earlier that, a teacher is often time poor. Most teachers I've met and most teachers I know, and when I was a teacher, very passionate. Like I can't speak for everyone, but generally very passionate about the role. That's why you go into teaching, but very busy. And so schools are busy places. And I suppose it's just keeping in mind as well that balance between I need to advocate for my child, which is very, very important, but also working out ways to do that in a way that what you're advocating is well received, so that you're collaborating together. And just remember, there are lots of children transitioning, and keep this in mind when requesting things like meetings and visits. And I think also remembering that in the year before, so say, for example, if your child's starting school next year, the teacher that they will have and the learning support people that you would like to meet with next year are currently already meeting children who are in the school this year. So there isn't, not that I think people think this, but there isn't like an additional person in most schools that would be taking on that role for children who are starting next year. So you can understand then that the juggling act is quite tricky. So I know one of the questions, Bree, that you mentioned was about that came up when people were registering, was around, is it unusual or is it usual for the meeting not to be had until next year? and it is. It's sometimes really difficult to have a meeting like this year in order for preparation for next year. Sometimes that will happen. Sometimes there will be visits to a childcare centre. So, if the child, really has some specific support needs, then they will try and have a transition person who will, or, someone who's on the kindergarten, so, is aware of it, to go and visit at a childcare. But that isn't able to be offered for every child. Um, so I think that's just something to be aware of. And also, just quickly, and we talked about this again, I think a little bit in the reasonable adjustments and maybe in the IEP one as well, is around, oh, my brain just forgot that one. Sorry. I was going to keep talking until it came up. It'll come back to me. I'll continue. Sorry. Collaborative team partnerships significantly improve social and emotional learning outcomes for children with disabilities transitioning from early childhood into school. So there's a lot of research that shows that there is, a significant improvement, as in it's really helpful for the child's long-term gains. And it's an ongoing process. So it starts before school and it will continue once your child is at school. One of the things I know sometimes get asked is, say, for example, if there's a transition day or a transition morning, and your child, finds it really difficult to separate from you, can you stay at the transition morning? Now, that really depends on the school. It depends on, it depends on the school and what they believe is best. So sometimes I know it can be incredibly difficult, but sometimes it is also valuable information for the school to have, to know that those things are difficult for your child. And that doesn't mean they're left there and they cry for 2 hours. Obviously, that's not what we're aiming to do. But I think just to look at how that works, because that will be what happens when school starts the following year. So we have collaboration, reduce family stress. So transitions are significantly less stressful for families when professionals are actively communicating, sharing information, and using initiative rather than working in silos. So rather than each individual working alone, collaboration is obviously much better. Preparing receiving teachers, preventing support fractures. So some of this is in language that isn't necessarily like parent language, but it's information. Just if you hear some of that being used, that's what that refers to. So, coordinated team planning, and then continuity. Kylie's written that, and I don't know.
Continuity.
Continuity. Thank you very much, Bree. Continuity of care. The more you try and do it, the more you
Yeah.
don't do it correctly. So continuity of care, because obviously if your child has had early childhood experiences, like within a preschool or within a early childhood centre, and also within your family, like they have a whole rich learning experience and learning environment before they go into school. And what a good school will do is they will build on that continuum, so that it's not starting from scratch and it's building on those things that will be creating that sense of belonging for your child. There is actually a very nice clip on the DET website, which again we will share the link to. I talked about observations, so I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I've covered everything.
It's a lot, isn't it? Like
It
there is
is
a lot
a
that
lot.
comes
I
into
know.
supporting your child in the transition of school. Like
There
there's
is a
a lot
lot.
of things that we need to consider and a lot of
There
things
is.
we need
Yeah.
to get communicating.
Yeah.
So I can see why it's so important to start these conversations as early as possible if you
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. And I think also to ask for help, like to get your support team around you and around your child, because some of it's brand new information, and it is always better, pardon me, or more confidence building if you might have another person in there with you to ask some questions that you might not think of. And along that line is around family advocacy. So that is a resource that's available for free. And they are an organisation. We will put the link up for that as well. And sometimes people will reach out for family advocacy, but they might reach out for it, when things have already gotten a little bit tricky. I think it's a really good resource just to have a look at, because then again, it's very similar to the DET, but actually from a bigger perspective, as in it covers, the what was mentioned earlier, the Disability Discrimination Act, the rights of the child, all of those sorts of things. And so family advocacy really just makes sure that you are aware of those, that legislation, and that you're able to then support your child and the expectations that you can have from the school. So I think it's a really good website to have a look at. And it's really good to make a phone call if you have any questions. And if you start that process early, then it also just builds your knowledge base.
And I'll just jump in there quickly, Kim, just
Yeah.
for anyone that's watching that isn't New South Wales based. So, Family Advocacy
Yes.
is a New South Wales based organisation. There are other organisations per state that actually do a very similar role, and I'll make sure we link them in the resources as well.
Oh, fab. Yep. Thanks, Brent. Okay, so this slide here again shows some of the language that is used in regards to the transitioning. So I won't go into the detail of that too much, but it just gives you a bit of an idea of language that's used and the processes that are followed. So you have your core transition team. And then establishing communication channels. So that's things about how reports will be shared, how information will be shared, consent forms, all of those sorts of things that I mentioned earlier. Review funding and system eligibility. So funding is something, say for example, your child there may need to be some adjustments made in the physical space in the school or in the classroom before your child starts. So that's obviously a conversation that needs to be had fairly early on. If, say, for example, it might be wheelchair ramps, or it might be, the height of different things within the classroom. Scheduling reciprocal site visits. So that's what we were talking about before, about teachers visiting the childcare centre. Strength sharing. So very much as possible, we are talking about some of the support needs that are there, but from a strengths-based perspective. It's about how can your child be supported within that environment. The current support strategy, so that's where the information gets shared from your different therapists. School transition logistics, that gives you just some information around class placement, physical setup, funding deadlines, orientation visits and when they happen. Some of these things will be behind the scenes, so you won't necessarily hear this language used, but I think it's just interesting to be aware of. And action. So then who needs to submit different statements, submit paperwork. Also things like there might be an individual social story. Maybe your child's speechy could do an individualized social story. There are lots of schools nowadays, I've noticed, who do a generic social story for the school, and they give that to all kindergarten children electronically before they start, which I think is a really lovely way for them to get familiar with the school, and a great resource. Again, part of what I sort of mentioned earlier, because that's been happening more and more over the past few years, schools have taken that on board, and it's become, for some schools, part of their tier one kind of process, which is great. That's what you want, for those things to be increased. So adapting strategies from home or therapy for the classroom. So we've talked a little bit about the About Me pages, which I know Belongside has a really good one. Did you say you're going to be doing a workshop on that soon?
We are actually hosting two workshops this
Uh, yeah,
term.
yeah,
So basically, people will create their All About Me page in that workshop, which I'll share the links for as well. We're
great.
sharing lots of links.
We are sharing lots of links, all very valuable links.
It is.
And then, what supports are used at home and in therapy sessions. Together with your child's therapist, you might create a communication passport or a book, and then sharing that information in your child's voice as much as possible. A summary page, so asking your child's therapists and educators to create a one-page summary of current strategies, and as I mentioned earlier, focus on what's being used, what can be used in the school environment. Now, some of those may obviously be not something I mentioned before. As much as possible, try and make it something that teacher can use with more than just your child. But that obviously doesn't apply if it's to do with things like, your child's specific physical health care or safety needs. That's definitely 100% fine to have the one-to-one, like a strategy that's needed for one-to-one. Um, and once settled, members of your team, like the physio or the OT or the speechy or behaviour support, may be able to visit your child in the classroom and support the school to adapt strategies for your child. And you need to check with your child's school for that. So some schools are very open to that. Some, I think, especially over the last few years, as there have been more therapists coming into schools, under the NDIS funding, have found that difficult. I know some schools might allow therapists to come in, say, if a child is in a support class, but not necessarily if the child is in mainstream. Some schools will say therapists can come in for, kindergarten to year 2, but not for the older grades. So those are all just things anecdotally that I have come across. So just to be aware that there are differences. A classroom is also things. So some other things to remember: a classroom is made up of lots of other children and their needs, and the teacher needs to prioritize strategies for lots of students. Sorry, Bree, is everything okay? Oh, okay. And some strategies, like I said, can also be used as part of the reasonable adjustments for more children within the classroom. Ways families and the teams can support a child to feel ready for school. So some things are like information. Always talk positively about the school. Just be aware of when your child's listening. Like we're all, children are there, but sometimes it's, oh, they're there. Oh, they've heard things, so they've got their ears switched on. And I suppose the other thing is it's very normal if you are feeling anxious about the transition. Just being aware, I know this is stating the obvious, but just be aware that sharing that with other adults. So you need to have safe spaces where you can share your concerns and not have that be within earshot of your child. They may have their own anxieties, and then part of your role as a parent is to support them with that and encourage them. So become familiar with the school, visit the school as often as you can. As I mentioned earlier, things like open days, fates. When you drive past the school, point it out, be excited. Oh, look, that's where you're going to school. How exciting. Visit during community events. Some schools in the Department of Education and Training also have what's called Share Our Space program. You might have seen big signs up as you drive past some schools. And that basically means that those schools are open during the school holidays. And you can go there and you can play and you can run around. I know there are some school for special purposes who also have that as part of the Share Our Space program. And I know I've had some feedback from different parents that say that has been really, really valuable because so in that summer holidays, before their child started school, they were able to go and, jump on the trampolines at the school and which I think is really fabulous. And that worked really well for them and continues to work well for families, I think, as well. Participate in all transition and orientation programs as much as you can. They are really important. And initiate and participate in transition meetings with the school. Ask the school for a social story, as we talked about, and read that social story. Have it out, talk about it, read it at dinner time, make it a bedtime story. The more that is supported, the more familiar your child will become with the school. So ways families and the teams can support a child to feel ready for school. Building your child's confidence. So they may say to you, I'm worried or I'm scared or, they might talk about friends or friends that they will miss. That's all part of the transition process. So, validate their feelings if they express worries and also reassure them of how they will cope with the changes. Talk to them about the strengths and the things that they are able to do. Get them excited about some of the things that they will learn at school. Becoming familiar. Oh, we've already done that. Let me just have a quick look. Participation. Oh, we've covered those. And there are quite a lot of good resources around different skills that you can help your child with before they start school. And again, that doesn't mean that they need to have all of these in order to enter school. That's not how it works. But as much as possible, try and work towards some of those things. So there's some information to some links there. Early Ed also has some information around that. And so these resources are part of our Ready to Learn Together program, and they are multicultural resources. So they're in English as well as various other community languages. And they explain around skills that your child can learn around being more independent, asking for help. That's a really big one because sometimes children haven't specifically been taught that they can do that. So that's a nice one to practice, even if it's from things like, you might be in the kitchen and you might go, can you go and ask Auntie to, and then they have to go and do a little message or things like that. So that's a nice way to get them used to that. Looking after their belongings. They tell us how much children are helped be ready to start school if they visit their school beforehand, take part in the orientation sessions. They're translated into 14 different languages, and there are also some little videos that you can have a look at as well. I know that we would like to show that, but I'm just aware that we're already at 8:45, so I might just skip that one. No, let me just do it really quickly. Is that okay, Bree?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. Because they are really valuable, and I've had some really positive feedback from parents. Now let me just make sure. Oh, what did that say?
You just might need to resize your screen.
Oh, that's completely not there. Can you hear it?
Yep.
What is that? So yes, those are, if you follow that, the link that we'll have as part of the resources, they're just one page documents that you can print out, you can have on the fridge, you can put on your phone, and it just gives you some little tips. So when a child starts school, there is so much for them to get used to. And a child who is prepared for school settles into routines and learning more easily. They can focus then just on learning what their teachers are teaching them. And starting school is a major step for all children and children who are ready to learn. And as it also mentioned in the little video, you as the family are your child's first and most important teachers. So there's lots of skills that you have already taught them that will be built on as they start school. Ways your family can build positive relationships within the school community. So part of it is, you also finding your belonging and your community. So joining school groups, volunteer. There are still parents and citizens associations. You may still be able to volunteer in the classroom, school canteen, uniform shop. Not all schools offer these. I know since COVID, some of those things did drop off, but definitely ask. Respect boundaries and collaborate. So sort of what I mentioned earlier. Work together with your child's teacher. Communicate your concerns respectfully. Your child's teacher's time is limited. So if you want to talk to them, arrange a time so you can both be prepared. I know sometimes, it's nice to do a little quick check-in at the end of the day. The difficulty sometimes around that, I know if I speak from professional experience, it can be really tricky because you want to give more information, but if you're doing that with, multiple children and multiple families, it isn't possible. And so if you really would like some feedback, set aside a time and organize a meeting and to really specifically talk about your child. The other thing that does is it helps your child's right to privacy, so that you're not speaking to the teacher or the SLSO, which is the school learning support officer, or it used to be known as the teaching assistant, at an allocated time, and you're not talking to them then in front of other parents and in front of other children, because again, same as I mentioned, your child is listening, other children are also listening. So if you're talking to the teacher about, private information or personal information, that's very important. Like, I understand that you need to know that information, but it needs to be set up in such a way that, your child's right to privacy and dignity is respected. Okay. Here's our link for our resources and some more resources. And that's before Bree sends out the actual resource link. The other thing that we do have, Early Ed, and I know there are some other organisations, is something called Start Strong. So Start Strong is an initiative where from the government that allows therapists and early childhood interventionists to support families on a limited scale. So we often can do something like 2 or 3 sessions with you, depending on the area that you live in. And get talk to you about some of your concerns and maybe work on a particular area of concern. So if that is something that you'd be interested in, ring that number, and then someone can talk to you about whether or not that is something that's available in your area. It's not all available in all areas of Sydney. And again, I'm not sure if it's a nationwide. So these are some resources from Early Ed. Have a look at those. They're really great. And just a little bit more feedback would be fabulous. We have a feedback form, which I know will also be sent out as part of the resources. But if you could, at this point, I know it was a lot of information. I do feel like I talked a lot and maybe a little tiny bit too fast. I apologise for that. But if you could share one thing that you have learned from this webinar, just in the chat right now, that would be really appreciated, because it just gives us a bit of a sense of where things have landed for you. If you could also take maybe a scan of that, and just takes about 2 or 3 minutes to complete after the session, that will also just give us some valuable information just around future workshops and what you found useful and maybe not so useful about this one. And should I go on to the poll, Bree?
Yeah,
or
we've got a few comments coming through. I'll just read through
Okay, yep.
a few of them. Somebody's written they like the reminder that kids are always listening. I always say my son's not speaking, and I think he knows everybody's secrets because people always talk in front of him. And I'm like, if he
Yes.
could talk,
Yes.
gosh knows what he'd be telling everybody.
Yes.
Someone was appreciative of the family advocacy. They didn't know that that was available. Another person was, this is the first time they've heard about the Best Start kindergarten assessment and the transition to school statement. So that was really helpful. Someone's child's due to start a 10-week kindy transition program in week 5, and they've been intensely communicating between school, preschool, and therapy. Well done. But after the webinar tonight, I feel confident that I'm on the front foot. So thank you. To have it all set out so beautifully and easily is such a great help. Monique said, get involved in the school community, and it's never too early to start the ball rolling. And again, another person liked the idea of the summary sheets to help keep everybody on the same page. They were just typing long answers.
Yeah. If they're anything like me, that takes a little while.
Yeah.
Okay, we just have a second poll.
Yeah, I'll pop that up. And then we'll have some time for some Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Bree.
Okay, so we're asking the same question, aren't we?
We are, yes. So how confident am I feeling at the end of the presentation in working together with my child's team to support their transition to school? So again, very confident, a little confident, not confident, and you're still not quite sure.
I've definitely seen a few more on the upper end of the scale, which is good. Unfortunately, there's still a couple or maybe one person out there that's not so confident, but hopefully, maybe when you've reviewed some of the resources and watched some of the videos, we can bring that up a little bit. It is
Yep,
a lot. It is a
it
lot.
is a lot. Yeah, it is a lot. You could almost do two workshops on
Oh,
this.
absolutely.
But that's
Absolutely.
with all of them, isn't it? But it's a good starting point, and I think, yeah, take on it like anything that you learn. I try and remind my sometimes anxious brain about this. It's, take on the bits that are helpful, and the rest will come. Even if you just walk away with one or two different things.
I'll share the results now.
Yep.
Yeah, so definitely sitting up in the higher part, which is good. I really want to get that person that's not confident a little bit more.
Yeah. Please reach out.
I'm hoping
Yeah.
with the resource email that comes out, we
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
get you across the line. All right, I'll stop sharing the poll now. Um, did you have any other slides you needed to move through there,
No,
Kim?
that was it. Now we're just up to the Q&A, really.
Amazing. So we have had a couple of questions, and it's interesting because a couple of them that have come through remind me of some of those ones that came through with the registrations. And that one around, you know, holding children back and, when to start them. So we've had a comment from Rebecca just around her daughter's birthday's in November. They planned on her repeating 4-year-old kindy because she's in Victoria next year and then starting school when she's 6.
Hmm.
And just your comment regarding the child needing to be in school by the time they're 6. She's like, if the daughter's therapists and kindy teachers have recommended she repeat and not start formal schooling until she's 6, um, how do they navigate the age 6 requirement? If we have her enrolled in school but not yet attending, do you know if that's sufficient or whether
I'm
they
not sure, like in Victoria, how that would go.
Victoria and New
My,
South Wales have the same, I think,
oh, do they?
requirements,
Yep.
my
So my
understanding.
understanding is they need to be in school. Oh, okay. So the birthday is in November and
Yeah.
they're going to start the year after. Is that what? Yeah, sorry, I just have to always get, yeah. Um, I do know that I've worked, and this is more, I suppose, more professional experience rather than official policy. So, but I have worked in schools where there's been a special request made, and then documentation can be put in. And I think especially if it's November, you're not talking about July, like we're talking like sort of towards the end of the year. I would imagine if you approach the school and you said, listen, this is what the recommendation is, and you may need a support letter or something like that. I would imagine it would be okay, but again, that's more from an anecdotal experience point of view rather than from an official policy point of view.
Yeah,
I hope
and
that
that
makes
was
sense.
very similar to a question we had in the registrations around like,
Yes, it was.
do you believe children benefit from starting school as
Yeah,
late as possible or
yeah,
holding back? The child will turn 5 in January, so starting
mm,
primary school the following year. It's so tricky with like the years.
yeah.
Um,
And I think it also depends, because when you showed me that one today, I was sort of thinking about it during the day that it really, like, it depends on the community that you live in. It depends on the cohort of children that are maybe entering school at that time. It depends on the skill set of some of the children. I'm talking more sort of around a mainstream type idea. I do professionally and I suppose personally as a parent think it's better for them to be it's not an official term, like over ready rather than not quite ready, because and I think especially children, like it's a big change, it's a really big shift, and I think I don't necessarily use the language of holding back. Like, I don't think it's holding a child back until they're 6, because it also depends on which school system they go into. Some kindergarten schools or some schools with kindergarten might have a learn to play program. So then it's a really nice transition because they're doing lots of learning and literacy and numeracy within the play structure. So some schools don't have that. Some have a much more sort of academic focus, which can suit some other children. So it depends on the school, and I think it depends on the community that you're within.
yeah. And just on that topic of, I guess, school readiness,
Yes.
and I know there's a lot of families out there whose children will have, quite complex needs. And, for me, when my son started school, if someone had to show me a school readiness checklist, we wouldn't have ticked any of the boxes. Like,
Mm.
my son's a wheelchair user, he's non-speaking, someone has to feed him, someone has to change him. He needs help in all aspects of his
Mm.
life. It can be quite daunting when you read one of those school readiness, I guess, checklists. What would you say to those parents out there whose children, might not ever meet any of those requirements on like a school readiness checklist?
I mean, if I'm 100% honest, I would say don't look at them, I suppose, because if they're not a helpful document, um, then I wouldn't be using them. Like they're more documents for children who are sort of on the cusp, with things like, very basic example, they might get their school shoes and it might be tying your laces or doing the Velcro independently or things like that. So it's more kind of looking at, oh, actually, I probably should let my child carry their bag. Oh, I should actually get shoes that they're going to be able to put on and take off on their own. But if that doesn't apply, then you already have, I imagine, with your team, you already have amazing individualized goals, and those are the things that you're working towards, and not a generalized checklist, and your child, for example, Bree, would, I don't know your son, but he would be making his own progress in his own way, and that's exactly as it should be. If he's in the right place and he's being supported by the right people, then that's exactly as it should be. Yeah, I think if it's, yeah, I don't know if I'm saying that well. No, I am.
No, I
um
think that was perfect because I think
yeah,
that's a great answer because for
yeah,
me, I know like I'm actually very like my son's about to transition to high school and
yeah,
again doesn't meet he doesn't fit the mold for anything.
yeah, yeah,
But I just know that when in one of our previous webinars we had parents whose children had quite complex needs and they were like these school readiness goals and tips and stuff like that just weren't relevant to them and
no,
it can be quite hard because
yeah,
at that point, like, I mean, we still compare. We still look at what other children can do.
of course.
I know we shouldn't. Comparison
No,
is a thief of joy, but as a parent, it's still really hard to go through those things and go, okay, well, my son can't tie his shoelaces. He can't feed himself. He can't open his lunchbox.
yeah,
And I know that was me, so that's why I wanted to ask that question.
yeah. I think it's very important. And I think, like, again, not, but parents have expressed to me over the years, it's a grief. And I think it's at each of those transition points, whether they be, and I don't want to speak on anyone's behalf, but this is just from listening, that the big transitions, and also sometimes the little transitions during each day. Yeah, I mean,
And I'll add, my son still can't do all of those things, but he's had
yeah,
a very successful time at school and he's
exactly.
doing amazing things in his own way.
Yes.
One
And
last
so I
question.
agree. That was also the other thing I was just going to
Yeah,
say, is then what you do is, instead of looking at a generic checklist, you look at how far you've come. And I
yeah,
think that's a really valuable exercise to go, well, actually, you couldn't do that before, but now look at this,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Bree. Yeah, go.
No, that's fine. Our one last question is from Anna, and it's just around what can I do to make sure my child receives support from the start of kindy in February 2027? So next year, that's next year as it is. So I'm like, what year are we in?
Yes.
Even if it's only for 2 hours a day, like what can Anna be doing now to, I guess, build a case that her child needs support from the start of kindy? And I know in some cases, sometimes the school take a wait and see approach. Let's wait and see how it goes, and then we'll apply. What would you say to that?
So the tricky part around that is, so say for example, and I'm speaking very much on the New South Wales model because I don't, that's my experience, my experience set. Is they have, so if your child is going into a support class, then they will generally have support, sort of a ratio of like 2 to 8, 2 to 10. And that means one classroom teacher, one SLSO, and then 8 to 10 students, depending on need. And sometimes there may be additional SLSO time allocated for things like personal care, things like that. Um, there generally isn't one-to-one support, SLSO support offered, in most settings. So that's around support class and in mainstream. Now, in mainstream, if your child is going into mainstream and they have additional needs, then a school will often take like a wait and see approach, because what they need to do is they need to collect additional data to show that there is a need, which I know goes almost against, well, it doesn't almost go, it's the opposite of what we would usually say in a transition. Normally, in a transition, you would kind of put in additional support and then fade that support. But that isn't, unfortunately, how the funding system works. It doesn't mean it can't be done. Like if you feel really strongly and say it's for things like personal care or safety or one-to-one support is like 100% needed, then I think definitely have those conversations and be honest. But be aware of the limitations, because, and we talked about that a little bit in the I've forgotten the name of the webinar again. But yeah, the adjustments,
IEP, the
reasonable,
reasonable
yeah, and the
adjustment.
reasonable adjustments. Sorry, and the reasonable adjustments where we talked about the data that needs to be collected, that is then shared, and then the bigger system looks at, and this is again mostly around the Department of Education, yeah, looks at what is needed and what other supports are needed within that classroom. But that can take time, and usually it's around 10 weeks, and that is term one. Yeah, which can sometimes be really difficult, because by that stage maybe it hasn't worked well because the support wasn't there, and if the support had been there, but that's unfortunately how the system sometimes can work.
Yeah. I'm very mindful of the time we have gone over, and I
I
don't want to
know,
keep people
I
too much
know,
longer.
yeah.
There have been a few other questions, but we'll try and see if we can link some resources to cover
Mm-hmm.
those. But thank you so much, Kim. Always so helpful and practical. I really appreciate you sharing your time, knowledge, and experience with families tonight. Starting school can bring up so many feelings. I know there's sometimes excitement, worry, hope, uncertainty, and a long list of things to organize, which I think is very evident after tonight's webinar. Um, and I don't want people to feel overwhelmed. So we are going to
No,
send out a list of big
yeah.
resources, but just take what you need when you need it. You don't need to go through everything tomorrow or the day after when the resource comes, email comes out. But I just hope you feel a little bit clearer about the transition process and more confident about what your child's team can do to support them along the way. And I think one of the key messages we want families to take away is that you don't have to hold every part of this transition on your own. Your knowledge of your child matters, but also the knowledge of the educators and the therapists and the school matters too. And when everybody works together, children can be better supported to feel safe, included, and ready to take part. Um, Before we do finish, I do want to let you know about two upcoming Alongside Families workshops that might be helpful if your child is starting school or even if they're already at school. So we did mention the All About Me pages. So we have our All About Me interactive workshop, which we're hosting on Thursday, the 20th of August. That's an evening session. And then we're going to run it again on Wednesday, the 26th of August during the day. And in that interactive workshop, you create or you update one if you've already got one, a strengths-based All About Me resource. And that's going to help your child's teacher, SLSOs in the school understand your child's strengths, their interests, and their needs and supports. The second workshop is around partnering with your child's school. And I know Kim mentioned it today, just around that collaboration between school, home, and therapy. So we are running that workshop later this term as well. So again, we're doing an evening session on the 2nd of September and a daytime session on the 9th of September. And this is a real practical workshop to support families to build positive partnerships with their child's school and feel more confident working with the teachers and staff. So these workshops are free for families, and we'd love for you to join if they feel relevant to you. I'm not going to pop all the links in the chat because I feel like that's just going to overwhelm everybody. There is a little resource tab that do have a couple of the workshops linked there. But I will send them all out. I'll also link you to the previous workshops that webinars that Kim's referred to several times. So we did do a webinar on preparing for an IEP meeting. And we also had a webinar on, what are reasonable adjustments and what can we expect from school? And they can be really helpful too, particularly as you approach starting school to know, what that actually looks like in practice. But a really big thank you to everyone who has joined and those who have shared questions. We know many families are joining after a very full day, and I really appreciate you making the time to be here. As Kim mentioned, we will send out a feedback survey. One will pop up when you close out of Zoom tonight. And we're grateful if you could take a few minutes to complete it. Your feedbacks helps us keep offering free webinars, workshops, and supports for family. If today's session has raised questions, stirred things up or reminded you that you're not alone in this, we really encourage you to stay connected with Alongside Families. We offer free support, peer support, workshops, webinars, and they're designed to support parents and carers as they navigate school systems and everyday life. And you can find more about our programs on our website at alongsidefamilies.org.au. Kim, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
It's always such a valuable session. I know we had a little hiccups with some tech and things like that, but it's Monday night, it's early in the
That's right.
term.
It all
And thank
came
you
together.
everyone else for joining us. We hope you all have a lovely evening and keep an eye on your inboxes over the next few days, and we'll send out a link to the recording with a long list of resources for you to
That's
review
right.
when you have time.
Yeah.
Okay.
The bit
Thank
by
you,
bit.
everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.